The day the news went boom. Tonight's headlines. Agincourt alley-oop. Henry's archers defy odds in major upset. Submarine slapstick. USS Tang torpedoes itself. And Cardigan's charge of the Light Brigade goes dark. Plus, coming up, we expose the shocking truth behind the secret life of socks. Do they really go missing in the wash, or are they just trying to escape the feet? Those are the headlines. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date with a deadline.
News bang, scooping out the rotten core of media bias with a teaspoon of accuracy. Absurdity, 1415.
Shocking scenes from northern France today as English forces absolutely spanked the French in what witnesses are calling a right proper medieval massacre. The French army, who turned up wearing their fancy metal pyjamas, found themselves stuck in mud so thick you could build a cathedral on it.
English longbowmen, armed with what French commander Pierre de Fromage described as pointy sticks with string, unleashed what experts estimate as more arrows than there are stars in the sky, or frogs in a French person's dinner.
The muddy battlefield turned into what one observer called a nightmare on legs, as heavily armoured French nobles face-planted into the mud like drunk uncles at a wedding. Local peasant Thomas Turnip reported, "Never seen nothing like it. They was falling over like skittles in all that fancy armour. Couldn't get up, like watching turtles what's been flipped on their backs."
King Henry V, speaking exclusively to Newsbang, said, "Get in, coming home, it's coming home, medieval warfare's coming home." The French casualties were so numerous that several English archers reported repetitive strain injury from excessive arrow shooting.
1944.
Breaking news from 1944 as shocking revelations emerge about America's most successful underwater killing machine, the USS Tang. Previously thought to have sunk during a training exercise involving rubber ducks and pool noodles, new evidence suggests the submarine actually went down during active combat, taking with it the hopes and dreams of several thousand inflatable toys.
The Tang, known in naval circles as the underwater death banana, had been responsible for sending more enemy vessels to the bottom than any other US submarine, including 3 rubber dinghies and a man in a pedalo.
Eyewitness Clarence Bubbles McGee, who watched from his bathtub 3,000 miles away, described the scene. "One minute they were there, the next minute they weren't. It was like someone had pulled the plug out of the Pacific."
Naval historians are now scrambling to correct their records, which previously stated the Tang had merely gone for a lovely afternoon swim and forgotten to come back up. Admiral Chester Wet Pants Wilson commented, "This changes everything. We thought they were just really committed to the hide-and-seek championship."
1854.
Absolute scenes in the Crimea today as British military leadership demonstrated their mastery of advanced tactical blundering. In what witnesses describe as the most spectacular cock-up since Napoleon tried to invade Russia in flip-flops, the Light Brigade charged directly into Russian artillery positions after a catastrophic game of Chinese whispers went wrong.
Lord Raglan, watching from his comfortable hillside position, was heard to mutter, "Oh bugger," as 600 horsemen galloped straight into what one survivor described as a wall of boom-boom that would make Guy Fawkes wet himself.
Local peasant Dmitry Vodkovich reported, "I see British cavalry charging. Then I see British cavalry pieces everywhere. Is very messy. Would not recommend as tourist attraction."
The Russians, initially confused by what they assumed was mass suicide, continued firing until someone shouted, "Stop, stop. They're clearly having a worse day than we are."
Lord Cardigan, who led the charge, later remarked at the officers' mess, "Well, that's the last time I take battlefield directions from a man who can't tell his left from his right. Anyone for tea?"
Modern news bang, news through a lens of lunacy, cracked but crystal clear.
And now with the weather forecast, here's the ever-eccentric Shakanaka Giles.
Ah, the autumn winds are whipping up a fright, dear viewers. Over in the southeast, we've a right old mix-up. Rain, wind, and the occasional puff of ash, like a dragon with a tickly nose. Might want to keep those umbrellas handy, and maybe a gas mask, just in case old Mount Merapi decides to burp up another volcanic surprise. Swinging up north, the Scots are in for a blustery day, the kind that have even the sturdiest kilt wearer clutching their sporran. Gusts strong enough to send your haggis flying, I'd wager. Best batten down the hatches and stock up on brew. And in the Midlands, a bit of a temperature swing. 1 minute you'll be sweating like a wee bairn in a sweet shop, the next shivering like a Scotsman without his sporran. Typical autumn weather, I suppose, though I'd avoid hair standing 2T. King Mo flows is done to any son the is active volcanoes as just to be on the safe side. Summing it up then, ashy showers, wind-whipped Scots, and a sizzling then freezing Midlands. Sounds like Mother Nature's having a bit of a tiff. Batten down those hatches, lads and lasses, and that's all the weather.
Absurdity, 1415.
Agincourt now, where English forces, led by King Henry V, have achieved what experts are calling a bit of an upset against the French. Early reports suggest the French cavalry found themselves quite literally stuck in the mud, while English archers demonstrated their mastery of what military analysts are dubbing the pointy stick technique. The French nobility has suffered what palace sources describe as a rather awkward afternoon. For more on this developing story, we cross live to our war correspondent Brian Bastable, who's standing in what appears to be several feet of French mud.
The air is thick with the stench of mud, blood, and desperation. As I stand here on the battlefield of Agincourt, the screams of the wounded and dying fill my ears. Arrows darken the sky like a plague of locusts, raining death upon the French forces. King Henry V, resplendent in his armor, leads the charge against the enemy. His men, exhausted and outnumbered, find renewed strength in his presence. The English longbowmen, their fingers raw and bleeding from the endless volley of arrows, continue to unleash hell upon the French. The French knights, weighed down by their heavy armor, sink into the mud like stones in a river. Their horses, once proud and majestic, now lie in tangled heaps of flesh and metal. The field is a churning mass of bodies, a macabre dance of death. In the midst of the chaos, I witness a French soldier, his face a mask of terror, as an arrow pierces his eye, bursting it like a grape. Another, his arm severed at the elbow, tries desperately to stem the flow of blood with his remaining hand. The English men-at-arms, their swords and axes dripping with gore, press forward, hacking and slashing their way through the French ranks. The ground beneath their feet is slick with entrails and brain matter. As the battle rages on, the French constable Charles d'Albret, his once shining armor now caked with the blood of his own men, falls to an English blade. His head, still encased in his helm, rolls across the field like a macabre football. The day wears on, and the French forces begin to crumble. The English, their spirits buoyed by the prospect of victory, fight with renewed vigor. The screams of the dying mingle with the battle cries of the victorious, creating a hellish symphony of war. In the end, the field is a charnel house, a testament to the brutality of man. The English stand victorious, their banners fluttering in the blood-soaked breeze. The French, those who survived, flee like beaten dogs, their tails between their legs. And so, on this day, the Battle of Agincourt is won. The English, under the leadership of King V, have achieved the impossible. The French, once so confident in their superiority, have been humbled. The 100 Years' War rages on, but for now, the English savor their triumph, paid for with the blood of friend and foe alike. Brian Bastable, reporting from the depths of hell for Newsbang.
Dean to 1920.
Breaking news from 1920, where Irish politician Terence MacSwiney has achieved the dubious distinction of becoming the first Lord Mayor to expire through voluntary non-eating. After a remarkable 74-day protest diet in Brixton Prison, MacSwiney's unprecedented feat of gastric endurance has caused quite the diplomatic pickle. The British government finds itself in the awkward position of explaining why their prisons can't even successfully force-feed one determined Irishman. For more on this story of political fasting and its implications for Anglo-Irish relations, we cross, live, to our crime correspondent Ken Schitt, who's standing outside what remains of yesterday's dinner.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm standing outside what remains of Brixton Prison, where 74 days ago a man decided to flip the bird at British authority by refusing to eat a damn thing. Not a crumb, not a morsel, not even when they waved a juicy steak under his nose. Terence MacSwiney, Lord Mayor of Cork and certified badass, gave the ultimate middle finger to colonial rule. They thought they could break him with their fancy courts and their trumped-up charges. Instead, he broke them with nothing but his iron will and empty stomach. For 74 gut-wrenching days, this son of a gun showed what it means to die for what you believe in. While the British Empire sat on its fancy throne eating cucumber sandwiches, MacSwiney's body ate itself from the inside out, each passing day a thundering message to the world. And thunder it did, folks. From New York to Paris, from Rome to Tokyo, everyone watched as this Irish warrior turned his own suffering into a weapon sharper than any blade. When he finally kicked the bucket, it wasn't just a death. It was a detonation that shook the empire to its foundations. Tonight, as I stand here in the shadow of these prison walls, I can tell you one thing. Sometimes, the most powerful punch a man can throw is the one he throws by doing absolutely nothing. Ken Schitt, Newsbang.
1924.
The Daily Mail has published what they claim to be a letter from Moscow ordering British communists to cause absolute havoc. The letter, allegedly penned by someone called Zinoviev, though handwriting experts suggest it may have been written by the Daily Mail's tea lady, has sent shockwaves through the political establishment. The Conservatives are reportedly absolutely devastated to have stumbled upon such convenient propaganda just days before an election. For more on this historical hullabaloo, we cross to our political correspondent Hardiman Pesto.
I'm standing outside the Daily Mail offices with noted historian Professor Millicent Quibble-Smythe, and we're watching crowds gather as news of this shocking letter spreads across London.
And what exactly does the letter say, Pesto?
Well, Martin, it's quite clear. The Soviets want to turn Britain into a giant collective farm for growing turnips.
That's not at all what it says. The letter suggests communist infiltration of
turnips, Martin. Miles and miles of turnips. From Land's End to John O'Groats.
Pesto, can you actually read Russian?
Fluently, Martin. The letter clearly states, "Comrades we must make with the turnips."
Mr. Pesto, I must object. The letter discusses arms procurement and...
Professor Quibble-Smythe is clearly overcome by the shocking revelations about vegetable cultivation.
Has anyone actually verified this letter's authenticity?
Oh yes, Martin. I showed it to a man in a pub who once went to Moscow on holiday.
This is ridiculous! The letter is clearly...
Breaking news, Martin. The crowd is now demanding immediate action against turnip-based socialism.
Pesto, are you actually at the Daily Mail offices?
Well, technically I'm at a greengrocer's.
Why?
Research, Martin. Had to verify the turnip angle.
Thank you, Pesto. That was our political correspondent, apparently investigating root vegetables instead of what may be the biggest political scandal of 1924.
Nerdy News Bang, the solemn pursuit of the sublime truth.
Environmental catastrophe now, and disturbing news from the antipodes. Here's Penelope Windchime with a special report on historical littering.
Breaking environmental news. I'm Penelope Windchime, and today we remember the tragic littering incident of 1616, when Dutch explorer Dirk Hartog carelessly abandoned a pewter dinner plate on a pristine Australian beach. The plate, which experts believe may have contained traces of leftover herring, has been slowly leaching pewter particles into the delicate ecosystem for over 400 years. Local wildlife, particularly the descendants of the original seagulls who witnessed this shameful act, continue to suffer psychological trauma. The plate, now considered Australia's oldest piece of European rubbish, stands as a stark reminder of humanity's casual relationship with proper waste disposal. Studies show that if every Dutch explorer had left just one plate on every beach they visited, our oceans would now be approximately 40% pewter. The island, which has since developed an unhealthy obsession with tableware, hosts annual plate throwing ceremonies to exorcise this historical gash. I'm Penelope Windchime, and remember, take your plates home with you, or the seagulls will never forget.
And now for travel news, our correspondent Polly Beep has details of maritime mishaps and motorway mayhem.
Ahoy there, travel bugs. Polly Beep here, your girl on the go with a traffic report that's more turbulent than a ship in a storm. First up, a nautical nightmare off the coast of Brazil. The SS Principessa Mafalda is having a bit of a propeller problem. And by problem, I mean it's fallen off. Passengers are scrambling for the lifeboats, the captain shouting, and I wouldn't be surprised if a few sharks are circling, hoping for a spot of afternoon tea. Avoid the area unless you've got a strong stomach and a penchant for disaster movies. Meanwhile, the River Thames is looking a bit choppy. A giant propeller shaft has been spotted spinning through the water like a runaway carousel. Boat owners are advised to steer clear unless they fancy turning their vessel into a giant kebab. Back on dry land, the A1's looking like a giant jumble sail, thanks to a lorry load of life jackets spilling onto the road near Stevenage. And on the M25, it's slower than a tortoise in treacle. Rubberneckers are causing chaos, all trying to get a glimpse of that mysterious spinning propeller in the English Channel. Honestly, you'd think they'd never seen a bit of maritime mayhem before. This is Polly Beep signing off. Remember, folks, whether you're sailing the seven seas or cruising down the motorway, always check your propellers and keep your eyes peeled for rogue nautical debris.
Introduced 2001.
And now, our science correspondent Calamity Prenderville investigates how a retired cricket umpire from Essex accidentally invented modern computing while trying to organise his stamp collection.
Good evening, viewers. 23 years ago today, British innovation changed computing forever with the release of Windows XP, developed in a shed in Basildon by retired cricket umpire William Xanthip Pendleton, hence the XP.
This revolutionary system introduced the Bliss wallpaper, photographed in Clacton-on-Sea during a particularly nice afternoon. The famous startup sound was actually recorded by accident when a tea trolley crashed into a synthesizer at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
XP's groundbreaking features included the ability to right-click while wearing mittens and a revolutionary compatibility mode that could run programs designed for abacuses. The system could even handle up to 3 games of solitaire simultaneously without catching fire, a marked improvement over previous versions.
The most remarkable innovation was the integrated firewall, which employed a complex algorithm based on British queuing theory to determine which programs were polite enough to access the internet.
Despite initial skepticism, particularly from those who preferred their computers to crash more frequently, Windows XP went on to become the most popular operating system since the abacus. Even today, many cash machines and dental X-ray machines still run XP, proving that British engineering really does last forever. This is Calamity Prendeville, reminding you that technology marches on, even if it occasionally stops for tea. Back to the studio.
Udaistiku sin, hisaitusha news bang, anchoring truth in a sea of alternative facts.
And now for our royal correspondent, Sandy O'Shaughnessy, who brings us a rather peculiar perspective on the anniversary of George III's coronation, complete with his trademark tangential tales and inexplicable Irish wisdom.
Nice and easy.
Good evening to you, and another good evening, and sure, why not, a third good evening. Sandy O'Shaughnessy here, taking over from our esteemed colleague, Martin Bang, on this rather historical October evening. And what an evening it is, exactly 264 years ago. Today, young George III became King of Great Britain and Ireland. You know, it reminds me of young Tommy O'Malley down at the chip shop, suddenly inheriting his grandfather's collection of exotic garden gnomes. Although, I suppose running an empire is a touch more complicated than managing ceramic ornaments. Now, this George, he was quite the character. First of the Hanoverians to actually speak English as his mother tongue. His predecessors, bless their hearts, were about as fluent in English as my Uncle Paddy is in interpretive dance. And believe me, that's a sight you'd rather not witness after his third pint of Guinness. I've just received a rather intriguing letter from Mrs. Fitzgerald in Kilkenny. She writes, "Dear Sandy, every time I hear about King George III, my cat starts speaking in German. Should I be concerned?" Well, Mrs. Fitzgerald, perhaps your cat's just feeling a bit Hanoverian today. You know, at the tender age of 22, young George found himself suddenly in charge of an empire. Makes my own 22nd year look rather tame. I was still trying to figure out how to work the toaster without setting off the fire alarm. Though between you and me, listeners, I'm still not entirely sure I've mastered that particular skill. Speaking of skills, another letter here from Bernard in Dublin. Dear Sandy, I've started collecting teapots that look like famous monarchs. My George III keeps brewing Earl Grey, even when I put English breakfast in it. Bernard, sounds like a case of royal rebellion there. But as the clock strikes the hour, I must bid you farewell. Remember, whether you're inheriting an empire or just trying to make it through Friday night, keep that chin up and that crown straight. This is Sandy O'Shaughnessy, saying goodnight. And as always, see you later, alligator. In a while, crocodile.
All over the country for everyone.
Drain, news bang. Deception isn't news, it's a disease. Let's find the cure.
And finally, let's take a look at tomorrow's headlines. The Times. Byzantine army names. New emperor. War looms. There's a picture there of a very old coin. The Telegraph. Vietnam gets new president in dodgy election. I see they've got a map of the area. The Independent. Japanese temple complex finished at last. There's a photograph of a rather impressive building. The Mail. Police hunt for missing sausage in Salford. And that's it. Due to a printing error, today's edition of the Daily Mail was published with all the pages upside down. Apologies to all our readers. And that's all from us tonight. Good night.
Tune in next time for more artificially intelligent hilarity. News Bang is a comedy show, written and recorded by AI. All voices impersonated. Nothing here is real. Good night.